by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Aliens are surely dimensional beings.
It is an atomic bomb. It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
Welcome to Dark Discoveries.
Greetings, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever the case may be, whenever this episode finds you, wherever you are. I am your host, Jacob Kimbrough, and this is Dark Discoveries. Before we get started, I have a couple milestones I'd like to shine some light on. For one, we have eclipsed 300 unique downloads. To me, that's pretty extraordinary, considering the release date of this episode marks exactly 1 month of existence. I have you all to thank for continuing to listen in. I hope I am getting better at all this, and to those who have subscribed, rated, and reviewed, special thanks goes out to you. We are growing pretty quickly, and I have all of you to thank for that. Our second milestone, which is also pretty wild to me, although it may be commonplace, I'm not sure. We have listeners in 11 countries now. That seems pretty special. To all of you out there, please stick around. It's bound to get better. And if you're only sticking around for my accent, don't worry, that ain't going anywhere. Speaking of, today I got some allergy issues, so forgive me for being a bit nasally. Alright, now that all that self-grandiose stuff is out of the way, let's start the show. Today's show topic is the Amityville horror and all things about one of the most well-known haunted houses in the world. But first...
And now for this week's full disclosures.
So our first disclosure this week is probably one you have heard. SpaceX's Starship launch exploded in its epic first test flight. For those who don't know what SpaceX is, it's Elon Musk's private space company. They've been working to develop a giant rocket called Starship to one day take people to Mars. Before the trip to Mars, though, it will be tasked to drop NASA astronauts at the moon. SpaceX won a $3 billion contract a couple years ago to use Starship to take astronauts from lunar orbit to the surface of the moon, and the ability to launch, to thrust off of the surface of the moon back into the orbit of Earth. It's been pretty wild watching the step-by-step process that SpaceX has taken in developing Starship with their the Raptor engines and just building the most powerful rocket ever. This particular test was the first Starship launch. It did end in an explosion, but I feel like it was still a successful launch. If you haven't watched it, you should. It was pretty spectacular. Like I said, it's the most powerful rocket ever built. I think it has 33 first stage Raptor engines, and it left the launch bay successfully. It made it about 24 miles in the atmosphere before it didn't separate properly, and in turn blew up. But SpaceX's Kate Tice said that to get this far is amazing. Everything after clearing the tower was icing on the cake. This is the actual first launch. It's the second attempted launch, but this is the first one they were actually able to launch because the first time around they had, I can't remember what it was, they had some kind of, something happened. They weren't able to launch. So this is the first actual launch. I was just hoping it wouldn't explode at the launch bay. So to me, this is a success, and we're one step closer to more easily explore space. So if you want to follow SpaceX's journey with Starship, I've got a couple links in the show description where you can follow that, and they will update what's going on over time. It's pretty fascinating stuff, especially if you enjoy space, which who doesn't? I mean, space is just mesmerizing. Where we find ourselves today, the culmination of a bunch of different scientific advancements, and we're living in a great time for space exploration. The next story I have, and it'll be the last one for this week, considering the just the dearth of information we'll go through on the Amityville Horror. The second and last story is about a massive black cloud casting Istanbul into complete darkness for a total of 5 minutes. Now, when I say complete darkness, there's a video that shows it's daylight. And I've been outside when major storms come through, and it'll get dark. But I'm telling you, this is 4 a.m. complete darkness. It's wild. A Turkish meteorological group marveled at the experience, but said simply that it was just a cumulonimbus cloud floating over the city and not a harbinger of doom. Much to the delight of the residents, who were absolutely freaking out at this quickly changing meteorological event. To soothe the residents even more, a giant rainbow appeared in the sky shortly after the storm, which would likely assuage the concerns of those wondering what had just happened. It's a short and sweet version of full disclosures this week, but like I said, the amount of information we will have to go through for Amityville Horror warranted a more abrupt version of full disclosures this week. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the Amityville Horror story, which most people have seen the original movie or the pitiful attempt at a remake, that follows the Lutz family and their haunted experience at the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, Long Island, New York. The lead up to that story begins with the fated day of November 13th, 1974, when one Ronald Joseph Butch DeFeo ran into the local bar in Amityville and declared, "You have to help me. I think my mother and father are shot." A small group of people went with DeFeo to his home at 112 Ocean Avenue, which was near the bar, found that DeFeo's parents were in fact dead inside, as well as his 2 younger sisters and 2 younger brothers. One of the group was DeFeo's friend Joe Yeswit, and he made an emergency call to the police department, who searched the house and found the 6 members of the family dead in their beds. They were all lying face down, and they were all shot in the head. There was no silencer fitted on the rifle. There was no evidence found in the autopsies of sedatives being administered, and Ronald DeFeo over the years has claimed a million different stories. Basically any and everything you can imagine, he's claimed it. Obviously, when he went down to this bar, he wasn't claiming that he was the murderer. He was trying to get away with it. And immediately he was suspected of it because the weapon used was still in the house. He did not try to get rid of it. Not the brightest bulb in the pack, for sure. He lasted a total of 36 hours before being held as the believed perpetrator of this horrible act. The original story he gave the police was that it was a mob hit, and that Louis Fellini, a mob hitman, carried out the attack because of money owed by his father to the mob. But as we know of mob killings, they're a little more thought out, and they do a little better of covering up their alleged misdeeds, alleged murders, alleged whatever. They're usually pretty good at covering things up. The police knew that whoever had done this was a little more reckless. Now, going back to the thought that, or the fact that they were all killed on their stomachs and there was no sedatives found in their system, I have a hard time believing that no one could hear that discharge of a 35 caliber Marlin rifle. I mean, it's not a huge rifle by any means, but I guarantee you would still hear it, even in a big house such as the Amityville house. It's definitely a question mark, as there are question marks throughout the story. Oh, and another thing, the rifle was registered to the DeFeos. It was registered to Ronald DeFeo. I'm not sure if it was senior or junior, either his father or him. It was registered to one of them. And DeFeo left the gun and the cartridges, like I already said, on the property. He blamed the mob hitman Louis Fellini, who had an alibi, which, whatever. But he was out of the state at the time of the killing, so the detectives knew it wasn't him. He was busy killing someone else somewhere else. DeFeo told the detectives, after they confronted him with this, that once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast. So he broke down and told them, because of all the serious inconsistencies in his events. That's when they arrested him. And he began to tell other different stories. First, as soon as he and his defense lawyer, William Weber, mounted a defense, of course, they went with insanity first. And then DeFeo claimed that he killed his family in self-defense because he was hearing voices that were plotting against him. Now, the insanity plea was being supported by the psychiatrist for the defense, Daniel Schwartz. The psychiatrist for the prosecution, Dr. Harold Zolan, maintained that although DeFeo was a user of heroin and LSD, he had antisocial personality disorder and was quite aware of his actions at the time of the crime. Look at his ability, or his attempt. His ability was lacking, but his attempt to cover up his perpetration of these murders. The trial's judge, Thomas Stark, declared that DeFeo's crimes were the most heinous murders committed in Suffolk County since its founding. I could see that. The oldest son killing his parents and his 4 siblings is about as gruesome as it gets. He was found guilty right about the time that the Lutz family was buying the house. Ronald DeFeo was found guilty on November 21st, 1975, on 6 counts of second-degree murder. And on December 4th of 1975, the judge, Thomas Stark, sentenced DeFeo to 6 consecutive life sentences of 25 years to life. He was held at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in the towns of Fallsburg, New York, and until his death, all of his appeals and requests to the parole board had been denied. He passed away 2 years ago, March 12th, 2021, at the age of 69. The official cause of death has not been released to the public. His story changed multiple times while he was in prison, including once he actually claimed that he had committed the murders with his sister, Dawn, and 2 friends, Augie De Janeiro, and Bobby Kelsky, quote, out of desperation because his parents had plotted to kill him. Allegedly, DeFeo claimed that after a furious row with his father, he and his sister planned to kill their parents and that Dawn murdered the children in order to eliminate them as witnesses. He said that he was enraged on discovering his sister's actions, knocked her unconscious on her bed, and shot her in the head. Now, police found traces of unburned gunpowder on Dawn's nightgown, which DeFeo proponents allege proves that she discharged a firearm. However, at trial, the ballistics expert Alfred Della Pena testified that unburned gunpowder is discharged through the muzzle of a weapon, indicating that she was in proximity to the muzzle of the weapon when it was discharged, and not that she had fired the weapon. Now, he reiterated this on the A&E Amityville documentary that is extensively discussed in Will Survive's Mentally Ill in Amityville. Survive had an expert evaluate Della Pena's assessment, and the expert confirmed that he was correct. Moreover, the medical examiner found nothing to indicate that Dawn had been in a struggle. The bullet wound was the only fresh mark on her body. Professional skeptic Joe Nickel notes that given the frequency with which DeFeo had changed his story over the years, any new claims from him regarding the events that took place on the night of the murders should be approached with caution. Yeah, I mean, seriously, there's 15 different accounts of what occurred. He very well may have been crazy. He may have had a couple trips too much. Either way, he was never granted an appeal or parole and died in prison at the age of 69. Around the same time that he was found guilty, George and Kathy Lutz and Kathy's 3 children, Daniel, Christopher, and Missy, were on the look for a home to buy in the Long Island area. George Lutz, a third-generation owner of a surveying company, had just married his wife Kathleen, and they were trying to find their family home. George was selling his home while Kathy was selling theirs, and they were trying to Brady Bunch it in one house. So they were on the look. They looked all around Long Island. They had a budget that they could spend, but they also had a list of things they wanted in a house. They wanted something on the water because George had a boat. They wanted a swimming pool, and there was a few other ideal prospects in a home that was very hard to find in their budget until they came to 112 Ocean Avenue that had been empty for 13 months. And George and Kathleen Lutz they were so excited about buying a house, they weren't totally sure why it had been empty for so long. They were being shown this house, and George Lutz stated that his wife Kathy had fallen in love with the home immediately. And I mean, when you see the home, you can understand why. It's a beautiful, large Dutch colonial house situated in a nice neighborhood right off of the water. It's a beautiful house. I can see why they fell in love with it. The realtor showed them the house. They went over all the details, except for one particular detail that got left out until the very end of the showing, when the realtor said, "You know what, there's something I think you might want to know about this house. Maybe I should have told you at the beginning. You tell me. I'm not sure how I should have brought this to you." Yeah, there was 6 murders, a mass murder committed in this house about 12, 13 months ago. And George and Kathy are like, okay, it's a pretty big deal. They didn't really think about any kind of paranormal phenomena because of the murders. They just thought, okay, well, something bad happened here. Do we feel like this is something to hamper or to turn us away from this beautiful home? And they discussed it, and they figured, okay, well, we'll come in $10,000 under the asking price, which had already dropped when the house went on the market. It went up for $120,000. This is a five bedroom house, 4,000 square feet. It started at $120,000 and had dropped all the way down to $90,000. The Lutz family had put in an offer of $80,000, which was a little over what they had budgeted. But I mean, for this dream home, you'll find a little extra bread if you need to. Eat a little more top ramen or bottom ramen if that's all you can afford. They said they discussed moving into this home with their children. They discussed what had gone on, and as a family, they decided it wasn't a problem. So, a couple weeks later, they begin to move into the home on December 18th, 1975. Now, much of the DeFeo family furniture was still in the house because as part of the deal of buying the home, the Lutzes were given the option of buying all of the furniture for an extra $400. It was really nice furniture, according to George Lutz. It wasn't blood-stained or anything crazy. It was just furniture. So they bought it, which I thought that's almost a bridge too far. But I mean, if you're going to buy the house where these 6 murders are committed, what does it matter about the furniture? It's just furniture. So $400 for a 5-bedroom suite of furniture. Yeah, I would probably do the same. A friend of Lutz learned about the history of the house and insisted on having it blessed. At the time, George Lutz was a non-practicing Methodist, and he had no experience of, Catholic doctrine and details. He didn't really know what a blessing would entail. Kathy was a non-practicing Catholic. She explained the process to George. And George Lutz said that Kathy was still very religious, even though she wasn't a practicing Catholic. George did know a Catholic priest named Father Ray Mancuso, who was a lawyer, a judge of the Catholic court, and a psychotherapist who lived at the local Sacred Heart Rectory. They knew each other for quite a while and had gotten on a pretty good basis. They talked to each other on the phone, according to George Lutz, at least once a week, sometimes once every 10 days. But they had stayed in contact almost religiously for quite some time. And George didn't realize that it was a little bit out of someone like Father Mancuso's jurisdiction to have him bless a home. He was a pretty well-known judge and pretty high up in the Catholic Church, but because of their friendship, he asked Father Ray to carry out the house's blessing, and Father Ray said he would gladly do it. He arrived to perform this blessing while George and Kathy and the kids were unpacking their belongings on the afternoon of December 18th, 1975. As they were unpacking, Father Ray went to the building to carry out these rites of blessing. He flicked the first holy water, began to pray. He says he heard a masculine voice demand that he get out. Now, when leaving the house, Father Mancuso did not mention this incident to either George or Kathy. He did not get out when he was first told to get out. He continued to go through the house and bless it. But after he was done blessing the house, on his way out, he asked George Lutz what they had planned to do with one particular room on the second floor. George said that his wife had planned to use it as a sewing room, and Father Mancuso said fine, but he advised him to stay out of the second room completely. He still didn't tell him because of this mysterious voice that he heard. Following his visit to the house, Father Mancuso allegedly developed a high fever and blisters on his hands similar to stigmata. For those who are unaware, stigmata is basically a mark spotter brand which appear in locations corresponding to the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ, which are the hands, wrists, feet, pretty center located. Now, at first, George and Kathy didn't really experience anything unusual in the house. Talking about their experiences subsequently, separately, they reported that it was as if they were each living in a different house. In the first days, a lot of weird activity, such as George can recall standing at a window looking outside and not being able to hear the traffic go by, or seeing different things that should produce a sound, and you couldn't hear anything. He said the kids were playing outside, and he was watching them, and he could see that it looked like they were laughing and screaming and playing like kids do, and he couldn't hear them. And he said that he thought, consciously about it, but it didn't seem like a big deal. He's like, well, whatever. And he moved on. The high strangeness started to get worse immediately. George can recall laying in his bed and hearing the door slamming, the front door downstairs, rushing to get up and going to check on it, and nothing. The door being completely shut, and their big Malamute Labrador mix dog named Harry was just laying there at the door, like nothing was going on. Kathy can also recall hearing cabinets slam, doors shut, in places where people shouldn't be. Really, this was just the sophomoric beginning of the haunting at Amityville. Eventually, things would get to the point where you couldn't just dismiss what was going on as coincidence. In the sewing room, the room that Father Ray said don't use, there were multiple occasions of the window in that room being completely infested with flies. All the family members saw it, and They believed 500 to 1,000 flies in that room on multiple different occasions. They'd killed them, and the flies would just come right back from no particular source. In their bedroom closet, George and Kathy Lutz's bedroom closet, Kathy had put up a rosary in the closet, and within a week, it had begun to smell like rotting meat. The rosary itself did. There was strange stenches coming from multiple different rooms in the house. The kids began to fight more frequently. They weren't playing together as much. They were keeping to themselves in their respective rooms in the house. They turned that sewing room into a playroom, which was a great idea. Let's put the kids in there. And about 10 days in, the kids got together and said they wanted no part of the playroom. And they wouldn't give specific reasons. The youngest child, Missy, would stay in her room most of the time. And she made a friend named Jody. She called this imaginary friend that she said looked like a pig. And this triggered something in George's mind when he was going out to their boathouse. One of the many instances of hearing the door slam open of the boathouse. He was going to check, and as he was walking back to the house, he looked up to the house, the floor where Missy was at. It looked in the window, saw his stepdaughter staring out, looking at him, and behind her saw a pig face with red eyes. So he freaked out, as I can imagine. I would have freaked out too. He ran inside, went upstairs to check on Missy, and she was asleep in her bed. So, a lot of high strangeness going on. Missy always said that it was a very nice friend who said that they would always be together and they would never leave the house. Which, if you've ever seen a horror movie, that's a bit ominous. George and Kathy even said, after they had left the house, that they believed that the house wanted them to stay. That they had there was this draw to them to stay in this house. Father Mancuso called George on many occasions, and it would just ring and ring and ring. And George would call out to Father Mancuso. It would just ring. No answer. One time, Father Mancuso was able to get through to George and let him know he thought that maybe the Lutz family, he should take the Lutz family to the mother-in-law's house or somewhere, and the line became staticky and they couldn't hear each other, and then the call dropped. From that point forward, they were not able to get in touch with each other over the phone. Father Mancuso, as I said earlier, had gotten really sick. He wasn't able to go to the house himself, so he sent one of his friends, who was a police officer, to the house to canvass and see if the family was still there, because Father Mancuso thought, well, hey, maybe he took my advice, and they left. They did not, as the police officer told Father Mancuso. They're still there, so that attempt of getting the Lutz family out of the home was unfruitful. As we're coming to the final days after the daily events of paranormal strangeness start to turn into physical attacks. There were multiple times of Kathy levitating out of her bed and being thrown back into the bed. The kids were also levitated with their beds. There were occasions of being locked into rooms, just all kinds. A lot of signs that you should probably get the hell out of the house before the 28th day. The 28th day that they actually left, Father Mancuso was able to get in touch with George and told him, you have to get out of this house. This house there's something going on. you need to get out of this house and go stay with somebody. They will bless the house, and you guys can go back. He kind of had to trick him because, as George put it, if he had just told him, get out of the house and never come back, he doesn't think they would have left. George talked about feeling a kind of inability to think on his own and escape the home. He believes, well, he actually doesn't say that he thinks he was possessed, but the oldest son believes that his stepfather and he were both possessed on different occasions by whatever spirit or entity controlled this home. Once they left, they tried to have the house blessed on multiple times. They brought in multiple different psychics and parapsychologists and people to go through the house and try to figure out what was going on. The kids never went back to the house. So they had moved in on December 18th of 75, and by January 14th, 1976, George, Kathy Lutz, and their 3 children, with their dog Harry, left 112 Ocean Avenue, leaving all of their possessions behind. They went to Kathy's mother's house, and the next day a mover arrived to remove the possessions, send them to the Lutzes. He reported no paranormal phenomena while inside the house. Now, the possessions that were removed were not furniture and things of that nature. They were just essentials. They weren't. They left majority of their belongings in the house. They just took some of them. Immediately upon leaving the house, the Lutzes recorded over 45 hours of tape talking about what had occurred in these 28 days. In the words of George and Kathy, they did this to try to rid themselves of what had gone on, although they, according to them, were followed by this entity in part. George put it as viewing it as a half-life. Over time, it was getting lesser and lesser, but they were still being affected as they left. George recounts seeing his wife Kathy turn into an old crone in front of Kathy's mother, and the mother corroborated this statement that they watched Kathy turn into an old woman, and it took her hours upon hours to look like her normal self again. Apparently that also happened while they were in the home. No explanation for it. That's just what they stated happened. She turned into an old lady and then turned back into herself. Very strange. I don't understand it fully. I don't think we're supposed to understand it fully. That 45 hours of tape that were recorded, after being approached by multiple different authors and publishing houses, Tam Mossman, an editor of Prentice Hall, introduced George and Kathy Lutz to Jay Anson. The Lutzes did not want to work directly with any author, even Jay Anson, but they did submit that 45-hour of tape to him and said, here you go, do with it what you will. If you have any questions, you can ask us, but we're not retelling the events that happened because they said it was too frightening. They're afraid that if they kept speaking about it, it would continue to follow them. And thus, one of the highest selling books of all time, the Amityville Horror, was released in 1977 by Jay Anson. The original Amityville Horror book was continued in a series of books, 5 in total, from 1982 until 1991. Each one was given more fictional basis to each. Upon leaving the house in Amityville, the Lutzes took what meager belongings they had left, and they moved out to San Diego, California. basically as far away as they could to stay in the continental U.S. from the home in Long Island. And they restarted their life, or attempted to restart their life. They had a lot of legal battles. They filed a lawsuit against William Weber, the defense lawyer for Ronald DeFeo Jr., Paul Hoffman, Bernard Burton, and Frederick Mars, all who were involved with accountings of the hauntings and people involved with the Amityville ordeal. They also sued Good Housekeeping Magazine, the New York Sunday News, and the Hearst Corporation because the Lutz's alleged misappropriation of names for trade purposes, invasion of privacy, and mental distress. These claims against the news corporations were dropped, and the remainder of the lawsuit was heard. But in 1979, the judge dismissed the Lutz's claims. In September 17th, 1979 issue of People magazine, William Weber, DeFeo's attorney, wrote, "I know this book is a hoax. We created this horror story over many bottles of wine." This refers to a meeting that Weber is said to have had with George and Kathy Lutz, during which they discussed what would later become the outline of Anson's book. Judge Weinstein also expressed concern about the conduct of William Weber and Bernard Burton relating to the affair, stating that there is a very serious ethical question when lawyers become literary agents. Now, George Lutz was enraged with the loss of these lawsuits and the fact that everything was being called a hoax. He maintained the events in the book were mostly true, and in June of 1979, they took a polygraph test relating to the experiences at the house. The polygraph tests were performed by Chris Gugas and Michael Rice, who at the time were reportedly among the top 5 polygraph experts in America. From what I found, they were ranked as the second and third most accurate polygraph testers. The results did not indicate lying. And in October of 2000, the History Channel broadcast Amityville the Haunting and Amityville Horror Hoax, a 2-part documentary made by horror screenwriter Daniel Farrens, showed the polygraph test as proof that these events did happen, or at least the events as George and Kathy Lutz perceived them happened. But the debate about the accuracy of the Amityville horror does continue. The various owners of the house since the Lutz family left in 1976 have publicly reported no problems while living there. James Cromartie, who bought the house in 1977 and lived with his wife Barbara there for 10 years, commented, "Nothing weird ever happened except for people coming by because of the book and the movie." So the question about whether the Lutz version of events could have actually happened has been studied extensively over time. Me personally, I think that it could have very easily happened because there are questions of George Lutz's dabbling with the occult around the time that this happened. George Lutz said that never happened. But there are also questions of the house being on an Indian burial ground and a story of these events happening in this area over the course of every 50 years. So if that's the case, then if it happened in 75, we're looking, or 76, 75, 76, we're looking at another Amityville horror here in just a couple years. So you never know. Kathleen Lutz died of emphysema in August of 2004, and George Lutz died May of 2006 of heart disease. The couple did divorce in the late 80s, remained on relatively good terms. When asked, George said that, yes, the house had a lot to do with their divorce. George Lutz, he attempted to become a priest for a while and was so until their divorce disqualified him from carrying on his role. During the period in which the Lutz family was living at 112 Ocean Avenue, Dr. Stephen Kaplan, a self-styled vampireologist and ghost hunter, was called in to investigate the house. Kaplan and the Lutzes had a falling out after Kaplan said that he would expose any fraud that was found. Kaplan went on to write a critical book titled The Amityville Horror Conspiracy. The book was published in 1995. On the night of March 6th of 1976. The house was investigated by Ed and Lorraine Warren, a husband and wife team that were self-described demonologists, together with a crew from the television station Channel 5 New York and reporter Michael Linder of WNEW-FM. During the course of the investigation, a series of infrared time-lapse photos were taken, and one of the images allegedly shows a demonic boy with glowing eyes who is standing at the foot of a staircase. I have a picture of this photograph. You want to take a look at it? It looks pretty wild. The photograph did not emerge into the public domain until '79, when George and Kathy Lutz appeared on Merv Griffin's show to promote the release of the first film. 112 Ocean Avenue was also investigated by parapsychologist Hans Holzer. The Warrens and Holzer have suggested the house is occupied by malevolent spirits due to its history. Now, the Warrens' visit to the house was depicted in the 2016 film The Conjuring 2. The house known as 112 Ocean Avenue does still exist. It has been renovated multiple times, and the address has been changed to discourage sightseers from visiting it. The quarter-round windows have been removed, and the house today looks considerably different from its depiction in films and at the time that the Lutzes owned it. The house in Toms River, used as location for the first 3 films, has also been modified for the same reason. The local residents and authorities in Amityville, New York, are not happy with the attention the Amityville horror has brought to the town over the years. They tend to decline requests to discuss it publicly. The website of the Amityville Historical Society makes no mention of the murders by Ronald DeFeo or the period the Lutz family lived at 112 Ocean Avenue. In May of 2010, the house was placed on the market with an asking price of $1.2 million, and in August, the house was sold to a local resident for $950,000. On August 21st, 2010, the departing owner held a moving sale at the house, and hundreds of people turned up for the event. They were allowed to go inside the house, but not to visit the upstairs rooms or the basement. So who knows if this was a real haunting. After watching a ton of interviews with George Lutz, mostly, some with Kathy, and the eldest of the Lutz children is the only one to publicly talk about it. I believe that they definitely encountered something. I don't know what. I don't think they really know what. I think that something had a profound effect on them. I looked into the angle that maybe the first thing I thought about when looking into the legitimacy of the story was what was the monetary gain here. I mean, did George Lutz have a plan to go through with this because he wanted to make some money from the beginning and he thought this would be the easiest way to do it? Well, according to him, in a 2002 interview, he says that all told, from the books, the movies, everything, they cleared, after the legal fees, paying their lawyers and everything else, they cleared about $300,000, which pales in comparison to the tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that were made by the movie and the books. Jay Anson himself made over $12 million just for the Amityville horror book. I can't really confirm that that's only the amount that was made, but we're going to have to take him at his word here. He died in, George Lutz, when he died, was in Las Vegas, working as a tinkerer on old cars, which was his love and passion. He didn't have a sprawling estate or anything crazy like that. He didn't seem to have, the amount of money you would think that somebody would have in this situation of a franchise of hundreds of millions of dollars that had been made from it. I mean, we're talking about, between books and movies, there's over 15 different Amityville curse, Amityville hauntings, horrors, the asylums, just all kinds of different media that, fact and then fictionalized versions of these accounts of the Lutz's story. a lot of them don't have connection to the Lutzes or DeFeo murders, except for the reference to Amityville. But it's been a pop culture phenomenon since the DeFeo murders in 74. So I don't know. It's a fascinating story, and I would definitely like to go by and just see the house one day. So you tell me, what do you think? You think this is a real paranormal event? Do you think that the Lutz family just used the DeFeo massacre as a jumping off point for their story for monetary gain? What do you believe happened? Let me know. But no matter what we think, it's definitely had a profound effect on popular culture since the 70s. So, once again, we come to the end of the episode. I'd like to thank you so very much for tuning in. A lot of details I feel like I left out in this rambling, sprawling version of events. I've been going back and forth between writing a script for my episodes and then just trying to do bullet points and kind of just talk about what had gone on. I find that if I do the bullet point method, it's definitely more scattered. But you tell me what you prefer. If you want the more scripted version, which feels more robotic to me, but maybe it's not. You just let me know what you think. So I thank you for tuning into this episode. Please subscribe, rate, review, all that stuff. Tune in to the episode. Should have a bonus episode coming out this week, since we've got a growing listenership. I want to give you all a bonus for that. I thank you again for tuning in. If you would, let me know how I'm doing. And until next time, remember, let your eyes adjust to the dark.